The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado frontier when Elias Boone stepped onto his weathered porch, coffee steam rising from his tin cup like smoke signals he'd learned to fear. What he saw in his yard made his weathered hands freeze mid-sip. A young Cheyenne girl, maybe 16, lay crumpled near his water trough, dark blood pooling beneath her torn leg, her breathing shallow as autumn frost. Elias set his cup down with deliberate calm, the same steadiness that had kept him alive through Antietam and Bull Run. 8 years of solitude on this patch of scrubland had taught him that survival meant thinking before acting, but the sight of the wounded girl triggered something deeper than military training. It awakened the father he'd buried alongside his own child. She stirred as his boots crunched on the dry earth. Her dark eyes opened, wild with pain and something else, terror. When she saw his bearded face and blue eyes, she tried to crawl backward despite her injury, leaving a fresh trail of blood on the dusty ground. "Easy there," Elias whispered, stopping 6 feet away. He'd learned enough about the Cheyenne from trading posts to know sudden movements meant death. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her leg was mangled below the knee, caught in what looked like a bear trap, though no bears roamed this low country. Illegal snares, probably set by buffalo hunters who cared nothing for who got caught. The rusted iron had bitten deep, and infection was setting in, evident from the red streaks climbing toward her knee. Elias had seen wounds like this during the war. Without treatment, she'd be dead by nightfall. He retreated to his cabin, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. Inside, he gathered clean cloth, his medical kit from his army days, and something else, a jar of golden honey he'd traded for last month. Honey drew out infection better than anything the army surgeons had used. When he returned, she was sitting upright, pressing her back against the trough. Her traditional buckskin dress was torn and stained, but she wore it with dignity that reminded him of his late wife's quiet strength. A small medicine pouch hung from her neck, and her black hair was braided with blue and white beads that caught the morning light. "My name is Elias," he said, settling the supplies beside him. "I was a soldier, but that's finished now. I know about wounds." She watched him with intelligent eyes that held depths of suffering beyond her years. When he gestured toward her leg, she didn't move away. Working with practiced efficiency, Elias cleaned the wound while she bit down on a strip of leather he offered. The trap had missed the main artery, but the damage was severe. As he worked, he noticed her hands, stained with clay paint and ash, traditional war markings he'd seen before. "You were running from something," he observed quietly, applying honey to the deepest cuts. "Or someone." She spoke her first word then, barely a whisper. "Soldiers." The word hit Elias like a physical blow. He'd heard reports of cavalry units operating in the territory, often beyond official orders. Some were good men following protocol. Others were driven by grief and hatred that made them dangerous to anyone with dark skin. As he bandaged her leg with careful precision, the girl watched his face. Perhaps she saw something there, or recognition of shared loss, because she relaxed slightly against the wooden trough. "You can stay until you're stronger," Elias said, finishing the bandaging. "There's a lean-to behind the cabin. It's dry and warm." She nodded once, a gesture that carried weight in the silence between them. That's when he heard it. The thunder of hooves, distant but growing closer. Elias rose slowly, shading his eyes against the climbing sun. On the ridge above his property, silhouettes appeared against the sky. Riders, at least 12 of them, sitting motionless on painted horses. Even from a distance, he could see the war paint covering both men and mounts, traditional Cheyenne patterns that spoke of purpose and ceremony. They sat in perfect stillness, watching his cabin, watching the girl. The morning air grew heavy with unspoken threat. The painted riders remained motionless on the ridge for 3 hours, a silent tribunal against the morning sky. Elias had moved the girl, who'd finally whispered her name as Ayoka, into the lean-to behind his cabin. From there, she could see her people while staying hidden from any approaching cavalry patrols. Elias understood the message. The Cheyenne weren't attacking because they saw their wounded companion was being cared for, but they weren't leaving either. This was a test, a traditional challenge that required wisdom over weapons. They think I took you, Elias said, bringing Ayoka water and strips of dried venison. She was sitting upright now, her leg elevated on a rolled blanket, color returning to her copper-toned cheeks. My brother, she said in careful English, pointing toward the ridge. Strong Bear. He leads war party to find me. Elias studied the distant figures through his field glasses. The center rider sat taller than the others, his horse decorated with eagle feathers and painted symbols. Even from this distance, the man radiated authority and barely contained fury. What happened to your people? Elias asked, settling beside the lean-to entrance where he could watch both Ayoka and the ridge. Her dark eyes grew distant. Soldiers came to winter camp. Said we steal cattle. We had no cattle. They burned lodges, scattered horses. I ran into woods when shooting started. Elias felt familiar weight settle in his chest, the same burden he'd carried since his own family's death. Wars created orphans on both sides, left survivors carrying guilt that belonged to no one and everyone. The trap that caught you, he said. Buffalo hunters set those illegally. They don't care what they catch. Ayoka touched the medicine pouch at her throat. Grandmother's spirit protected me. Led me to honest man. The words stirred something in Elias he'd thought dead. His wife Sarah used to speak of providence, of reasons beyond understanding. He'd stopped believing after burying his son, but sitting here with this wounded girl while her armed relatives waited for his next move, he felt the pull of something larger than coincidence. At noon, the riders moved. Not toward the cabin, but in a wide circle, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm that seemed to echo from the earth itself. They rode clockwise around his property, maintaining exact distance, never coming closer than rifle range but never retreating either. What does it mean? Elias asked. They honor sacred space, Ayoka explained, watching the ceremony with pride. My brother shows respect for healing ground. But also warning. They will wait until sunset. Then decide. Elias understood. He had until evening to prove his intentions or face consequences that would likely end with his death and Ayoka's return to her people, wounded or not. That afternoon, while the riders completed their circle for the third time, Elias made his decision. He gathered supplies carefully, including the jar of honey he'd been saving for winter trades. Ayoka watched him with growing concern. You go to them? She asked. Someone has to break this standoff, Elias replied, checking his rifle before deliberately leaving it propped against the cabin wall. I won't send a wounded girl back to face whatever scattered your people. He walked across his property line carrying only the honey jar and a white cloth tied to a stick. The painted riders stopped their circling, 12 pairs of eyes tracking his movement as he climbed the ridge. Strong Bear was younger than Elias had expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His war paint was traditional, red and black stripes across his cheeks, symbols of protection and strength painted on his bare chest. His horse, a magnificent pinto, wore matching designs. Elias stopped 20 feet away and raised the honey jar, sunlight turning the golden contents amber. For healing, he said in the few Cheyenne words he'd learned from traders. Sister safe. Strong Bear studied him for long moments, taking in the graying beard, the military bearing that never quite disappeared, the steady hands that showed no tremor despite facing 12 armed warriors. Finally, he dismounted. The other riders remained mounted, arrows nocked but not drawn, as Strong Bear approached. He accepted the honey jar, examining it with the careful attention of someone who understood both gift-giving protocols and potential threats. You were soldier, Strong Bear said in accented English. I was. I'm not anymore. Why help Cheyenne girl? Elias met his gaze directly. Because she needed help. Because leaving wounded to die isn't the man I choose to be. Strong Bear nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like shared language. Tomorrow, we talk more. Tonight, she stays safe. The war party rode away as the sun touched the western mountains, but Elias knew they hadn't gone far. Dawn brought Strong Bear alone, his war paint replaced with simple earth tones that spoke of peaceful intentions. Elias found him waiting by the water trough where he'd first discovered Ayoka, the Cheyenne warrior studying the bloodstains that still marked the ground despite yesterday's cleaning. "She told me about the buffalo hunter's trap," Elias said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Strong Bear accepted one with a nod of acknowledgement. "White men set many traps in our hunting grounds," Strong Bear replied, his English more fluent without the tension of armed confrontation. "They say land belongs to them now. Government papers say this." Elias sipped his coffee, tasting the bitterness of truths neither man could change. Papers don't make something right. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd seen enough war to recognize when peace was possible. Behind them, Ayoka emerged from the lean-to, moving carefully but standing on her own strength. Her fever had broken during the night, and clean bandages showed the honey was drawing out infection as Elias had hoped. "Brother," she called softly in Cheyenne, then switched to English. "Elias speaks truth. Soldiers who attacked us were not same as him." Strong Bear's expression hardened. "Tell him about Lieutenant Morrison." Ayoka settled beside them, her injured leg stretched carefully. 3 days ago, soldiers came to winter camp. Leader had yellow hair, crazy eyes. Said cattle thieves hiding among our people. When our chief explained we had no cattle, Yellow Hair ordered search of every lodge. Elias felt cold recognition. He'd heard Morrison's name in trading posts, always spoken with distaste. The man had lost his entire unit to a Lakota war party 2 summers ago, survived only because he'd been relieving himself in the bushes when the attack came. The experience had broken something in him. Morrison found no cattle, Strong Bear continued, but he found hunting rifles, said they were stolen. When Chief White Elk demanded proof, Morrison shot him. The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Elias understood now why Ayoka had been running, why the war party rode painted for conflict. They weren't just dealing with military procedure gone wrong. This was a man using his uniform to wage personal war. "How many escaped?" Elias asked. 23, Ayoka whispered. "Scattered into 4 groups. My group was 8 women and children. Morrison's soldiers followed us for 2 days before I got caught in trap." Strong Bear stood abruptly, scanning the horizon with the instincts of a man who'd survived by reading danger in landscape. "They still hunt. Yesterday we saw smoke signals from Eastern Ridge. Morrison camps 1 day's ride from here." Elias felt the familiar weight of command decisions, the same burden he'd carried during the war when good choices were scarce and perfect choices didn't exist. If Morrison was nearby, both Ayoka and the Cheyenne war party were in deadly danger. But so was anyone who helped them. "There's a cavalry garrison at Fort Collins," Elias said slowly. "Colonel Patterson commands there. He's a decent man, follows proper procedures. If Morrison's operating outside orders." "White man's justice for white man's crimes," Strong Bear interrupted, but without hostility. "We know how this ends." Before Elias could respond, Ayoka gripped his arm. "Riders coming." 3 cavalry soldiers topped the southern ridge, blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. Even from distance, Elias could see they rode with the aggressive posture of men hunting prey. At their head rode a figure in officer's insignia, blonde hair visible beneath his campaign hat. Morrison. Strong Bear's hand moved instinctively toward his knife, but Elias caught his wrist. "If you fight here, you become the criminals he's claiming you are." "Then what do you suggest, soldier?" Elias studied the approaching riders, calculating distances and options with the tactical mind that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. Morrison was riding straight for the cabin, following Ayoka's blood trail that still marked the ground despite yesterday's efforts to clean it. "Hide behind the cabin," Elias ordered. "Both of you. Don't show yourselves unless shooting starts." "And if it does?" Strong Bear asked. Elias met his eyes with the steady gaze of a man who'd already lost everything worth losing. "Then you make sure Ayoka gets back to her people alive." The cavalry patrol was close enough now to see details. Morrison rode with the rigid posture of military academy training, but his eyes held the wild gleam Ayoka had described. The two soldiers flanking him looked uncomfortable, younger men following orders they didn't fully understand. Elias stepped onto his porch, coffee cup still in hand, presenting the picture of a man starting his ordinary morning. He'd learned during the war that the best defense against suspicion was looking like you had nothing to hide. Morrison reined up 20 feet from the cabin, his pale eyes scanning the property with predatory intensity. When his gaze fixed on the bloodstains by the water trough, his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Morning, Lieutenant," Elias called out, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man with nothing to hide. "You boys look like you've been riding hard." Morrison dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Name's Elias Boone, isn't it? Heard about you in town. Ex-Union soldier, keeps to himself." "That's right. What brings the cavalry to my place?" Morrison walked closer, his boots deliberately scuffing through the bloodstains. "Tracking stolen property. Indian girl, about 16, wounded. Trail leads right to your door." Behind the cabin, Elias knew Strong Bear was listening to every word, probably fighting every instinct to intervene. The success of this moment depended on Elias proving that not all white men were Morrison, that some still honored the codes of decency the war hadn't completely destroyed. "Haven't seen any Indians around here," Elias lied smoothly. "But those bloodstains you're studying come from a deer I dressed yesterday morning. Hung the meat in my smokehouse if you want to verify." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You're lying, Boone. I can smell the fear on you." "What I smell is a man who's forgotten the difference between soldier and butcher," Elias replied, his voice hardening. "I heard about what happened to that Cheyenne camp. Killing unarmed chiefs isn't military procedure, Morrison." The accusation hit home. Morrison's face flushed red above his blonde beard, and his two companions shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. These younger soldiers had clearly heard rumors about their lieutenant's methods. That chief was harboring criminals, Morrison snarled. "Cattle thieves and murderers, every one of them. Where's your evidence? Where are the stolen cattle?" Morrison drew his pistol, pointing it directly at Elias's chest. "I don't need evidence to deal with Indian sympathizers." The click of a rifle being cocked echoed from behind the cabin. Strong Bear stepped into view, his weapon trained on Morrison's head with the steady aim of a man who'd been hunting since childhood. At the same moment, Ioka limped around the opposite corner, her presence proving Elias's lie but also showing Morrison exactly what he'd been tracking. Corporal Jenkins, one of Morrison's soldiers, called nervously. "This doesn't feel right, sir." Morrison spun toward his men, fury distorting his features. "Are you questioning my orders, soldier?" "I'm questioning whether we're still acting as United States cavalry," the young corporal replied with surprising courage. "Sir." The standoff stretched taut as wire, for armed men and one wounded girl balanced on the edge of violence that would solve nothing and destroy everything. Elias recognized the moment from his war experience, the instant when discipline and madness warred for control of desperate men. "Lieutenant Morrison," Elias said quietly, drawing attention back to himself. "You have two choices. Ride away now and report to Colonel Patterson that you found no evidence of stolen property. Or start shooting and explain to a military tribunal why you killed civilians on a private ranch." "The girl's not civilian," Morrison spat. "She's a hostile savage. She's a wounded teenager who got caught in an illegal trap," Elias countered. "Look at her leg, Morrison. Look at the bandages, the infection. Does that look like someone who's been raiding cattle?" For the first time, Morrison actually looked at Ioka rather than simply seeing another target. What he saw was exactly what Elias described, an injured girl who posed no threat to anyone. The moment of recognition broke something in Morrison's resolve. His gun hand began to shake as the reality of what he'd become crashed over him like cold water. Behind him, both soldiers had their weapons drawn but pointed at the ground, making their position clear. "This isn't over," Morrison whispered, but the fight had gone out of him. He holstered his weapon and mounted his horse with jerky movements, his face pale beneath his campaign hat. As the patrol rode away, Elias noticed the two younger soldiers glancing back apologetically, good men trapped in an impossible situation. Strong Bear lowered his rifle and walked over to his sister, checking her bandages with gentle hands. "Wound heals well," he observed. "You did good work, soldier." "Not a soldier anymore," Elias reminded him. "Just a rancher who believes in doing what's right." A week later, Ioka was strong enough to travel. Strong Bear returned with 2 horses and supplies for the journey to their people's new camp deeper in the mountains. As they prepared to leave, Ioka pressed a small beaded pouch into Elias's weathered hands. "From grandmother's medicine bundle," she explained. "For protection and remembrance." Elias watched them ride away, 2 figures growing small against the vast Colorado sky. For the first time since Sarah and his son's death, his ranch didn't feel quite so empty. Some bridges, once built, changed the landscape forever. 3 months later, he received word that Morrison had been court-martialed and dismissed from service. Colonel Patterson had launched a full investigation after the corporals reported what they'd witnessed. Justice was slow, but it still existed for those brave enough to demand it. Thanks for watching this incredible story of courage and compassion in the Old West. If you enjoyed following Elias and Ioka's journey, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more authentic historical stories that celebrate the human spirit. What did you think of Strong Bear's decision to trust Elias? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know which historical period you'd like to see featured next. Your engagement helps me bring these untold stories to life. Until next time, keep exploring the real heroes of history.